Hello, and welcome once again to another episode of r/NuclearRevenge. My name's Ryan, the official host here at Reddit Voice. And before we jump into things, I'd just like to say I would appreciate it so much if you were to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to stay up to date on all the latest videos. Anyways, let's jump into that story. I got the call center shut down. When I was a freshman in college, I took my first office job working for a large company doing contract work to a partially owned subsidiary in the mobile phone industry. It was the 1990s and the world of mobile phones was in its days of every local telco still being separate from the devastature when they broke up MA Bell. You had tons of available companies to choose from instead of the big four and their MVNOs. Coverage maps looked a lot like someone sneezed on them instead of the coverage you had now. There was no data, no text, and 100 voice minutes was enough for almost anybody. It was the Wild West in telecom. The job paid well enough and the hours allowed me to go to my classes. The job was fairly easy. We were tasked with activating new accounts. This required us to run credit checks and collect deposits when necessary. In the spring and summer, things were relatively calm. The only rule that really upset me was that we were not allowed to read anything outside the company intranet during downtime, and this meant I couldn't knock out coursework. No big. Come November, they wanted us to work more and more overtime to ramp up for the upcoming holiday season. This I could not do as I was hanging on balancing a full course load in addition to the working of the requisite 40 hours. They instituted a demand for at least 10 hours overtime a week. We were a small part of the building as we took up less than half of one of the 4 floors, and we were the only company there that was not a defense contractor. The contractors were all pretty cool even if the MPs on floor 3 and 4 were a bit hard-assed, and they were nice to talk to on breaks. We had no room to expand. The office was also only open from 0800 to 0200. Because of the demand for overtime, they instituted desk sharing, but because they still didn't have enough desks, they couldn't seat everybody. I worked days and they wanted me to stay until 1900. This meant that the person with whom I shared a desk that would normally start at 1300 had no place to sit, and they were also expected to work the overtime, that they would show up for 2 hours early and sit in the break room until I left. I couldn't understand why they would pay this guy 2 hours of base pay and 2 hours of overtime to sit in the break room and twiddle their thumbs, but they determined that would be better than having me get out on time. Eventually, I had to tell them I was quitting since I couldn't do the demanded overtime. I left and figured that was the day. They called back 2 days after I left and asked if I would come back to work. I said I would on the condition that I would not be expected to work the overtime, and they said we would talk about it when I came back. I show up and they pulled me aside and said that they still needed me to work and do the overtime. I told them that it was impossible and that there was no point to having asked me back if I had to work it. We were at an impasse, so I quit for the second time within a week. The company started asking for more and more overtime of the remaining employees. A bunch of these folks had families, and it was to their delight that they were being offered hundreds of dollars in bonuses for breaking certain OT thresholds. Their kids would have the best Christmases of their lives, cars were being paid off early, and down payments for mortgages were racking up. Come January, the overtime is gone and there was no need for it. People are settling back into their former routines and payday arrives. From my friends that stayed working there, they said that there were envelopes that were opened and there were audible gasps coming from across the floor. Paychecks were being issued for $0.00, a large number of employees. One got a paycheck for 15 cents. The shock quickly turns to anger and the floor erupts. Management came out and addressed everybody and told them that the bonuses they were offered were not approved by the company and that the money had to be reclaimed. People were expected to work and collect checks for no money until the bonuses they were overpaid were paid back to the company, and that anybody that left would be sued by the company for the outstanding balance. They even told one guy that he was lucky enough to have a job there at all, since normally they only hired people with diplomas and he was a dropout with a GED. A number of those employees were still friends and relayed all this to me. I had just started a new job working at a third-party support for a portion of the company which I was previously contracted and did night hours to coincide with my new classes. I asked if they minded if I referred some contracts to them and if this would get resolved, and they said it was fine. I then spoke with a few people I knew with the defense contractors who were able to refer me to friends they had worked with at the IRS, since they would be very interested what with it kicking off a new tax year. I explained to the IRS what happened and provided them contact from my friends. 1 month later, after an investigation, the full force of the government came down upon the company. The IRS came in and demanded to speak with everybody that made the decision to withhold pay from employees to rescind the bonuses. It was eventually determined that everybody above a certain level was complicit in the scheme and would be held accountable by being forced out and facing potential jail time. The company was informed that all the monies would be repaid from them who it was taken, and anybody that quit so they could get a job that would give them a paycheck in the meantime was to be offered their job back, and should they refuse to take it, would be issued a full-time back pay from the date of their departure. They also determined that the company would either have to fire all those responsible, or the company would be responsible for the penalties that they were obscenely high. The company thought that they had their ace in the hole when they said that without the managers being allowed to stay on, they would have to close the call center. They were informed that closing it was fine since the final stipulation was that all employees were not involved in the scam would either be offered the chance to move to the office they had a county over, or would be offered very generous severance packages. The company opted to move the employees and shut the call center. Plea bargains were made, and everybody but the offenders went home happy. TLDR, I quit a job because I couldn't work overtime and subsequently got the call center shuttered. I'm the Padawan, my dad is the master. Back in 1991, my dad bought my mom a brand new Chevy Caprice. You know, the big ugly, fat as a whale cop car. It was white with fake mesh wheels and a white wall tires. My mother loved it. She had it 2 weeks and kept it parked in front of our house in SoCal. The guy across the street was a contractor. Back in 1991, that basically meant shady douchebag that hired illegals that stood outside Home Depot. Shady douche started remodeling a house up the street from us on our side of the road. They were doing some stucco work. At the end of the day, his workers decided to just dump the leftover stucco in the gutter and try to hose it down the street. It got all over my mom's tires. She didn't notice, drove off, and it went all over the passenger side of her car. My dad wasn't happy, not one bit. He went across the street to talk to the contractor neighbor. My dad is a 6'3" Air Force Vietnam Purple Heart recipient. He has fired a weapon in anger. Neighbor was a 5'4" a-hole with an attitude. Dad goes over and explains the situation, actually keeping his calm. He asked the guy to have the stucco removed from the car. The neighbor tells my dad to go F himself. I'm expecting my dad at this point to kill said neighbor, and instead he says, okay, and walks back across the street. He has my mom's car detailed, and that's that. 7 years later, my dad and I are watching a Laker game, and it's about 10 at night, and it's halftime. My dad says, I'll be right back, and walks out of the house, goes into the garage, and gets 2 one-gallon buckets of paint. He walks across the street and dumps it all over the neighbor's brand new BMW convertible. The neighbor had left the top down because it was May and the weather was nice in Southern California, so the entire outside and inside of the BMW was now covered in paint. My dad walks back, puts the paint cans in the garage, closes the door, and comes back to watch the rest of the game. The next morning, the neighbor comes out and sees his car. We hear him saying out loud to his wife, I don't understand who would have done this. I don't get this at all. He had forgotten all about the stucco. My dad just waited and waited. Fast forward to now. 7 years ago, an a-hole down my road hit my dog and killed him, then drove off. I found his hubcap in the road next to my dog and confronted him. Oh, I thought it was a deer. I'm waiting for a really nice day. The paint is ready in my basement. Edit. Holy shit, first ever award. Thanks. I'll have to look for other subs in my story from my dad. He was a wicked hippie man whore. His life could make for several fascinating books. Edit again. Thanks to this post, I watched both John Wick movies. I love Daisy the Beagle. I think now I must up the ante on my revenge. The person who hit my dog did so with his work van. I must render it inoperable so his business takes a hit. My petty revenge led me to a nuclear revenge victim. This is a long one, 2 for 1 actually. One on the petty side, and one was me meeting a revenge victim as a result of my pettiness. I needed to go into DC for a couple hours yesterday afternoon to tie a few things up at work before leaving for vacation. I didn't leave until a bit after noon, so I was pretty hungry and decided to stop at this nice little deli/grocery store on the way for a sub. It's a small establishment, but pretty popular. The parking lot's kind of weird and the spaces are on the small side and it's very narrow. I drive a full-size truck because I have tow-heavy shit often. I spot a corner space that's going to be easy for me to get in and out of, so I go for it. I back in partially and then pull out to straighten it up, and a lady swoops into my space in a little Fiat. I pull in my truck and park, then looked back through the window. She was on the phone, and when I gave a little honk, she looked up and gave me the finger. I gave her a slow shaking head and a thumbs down. I don't know why, but that gesture seems more impactful to me, like disappointment versus anger. I found myself another spot and started making my way to the deli. The angry lady was still engaged in her conversation and is now behind me walking to the deli. She's talking loudly on her phone about the redneck that almost wrecked her car in the parking lot, trying to gain sympathy from whoever she was speaking to, like I goddamn tried to assault her with my vehicle. So as I'm in the line to take a number to be serviced, it clicks. I can F with her a little bit today. I reach up to take my number and pull the next 10. Tucking them in as I turned around, so angry lady didn't see them. I make my way down the line, passing out the numbers ahead of hers and mine, putting 10 people ahead of us to order and receive food, making her wait an extra 20 or so before she got even to her order. Here's where it gets a little fun. My number was directly before hers, so I just waited at the counter after they called mine. As the girl walked up with the next sub, I asked if it was number 469, Angry Lady's sub. It was, of course, so the deli never called her number, and I bought both subs. I don't know how long she waited before she asked about her order. I do hope she wasn't an a-hole to the workers, though. The second part is what I did with the extra sub. I told a story from college a while back in the comments. I mentioned that I try to be a little extra now. Part of that is being kind to strangers. I work in DC and there's a ridiculous amount of homeless people here, so I pack an extra lunch a few days a week to eat with some random person. The extra sub was going to be my lunch date with whoever I ran into that looked like they needed a meal after I parked my truck. I found my overpriced parking spot quickly and grabbed the sandwiches and a couple bottles of water before making the trek towards work. I spotted a guy sitting on a bench with a light sign asking for change. I asked him if he'd like to have lunch with me. His eyes lit up and he shook his head yes. We had a little casual conversation and he asked me why I bought him a sandwich. I told him that oddly enough I bought it out of spite and told him how I came into ownership of said sub. He laughed, said it was fate that revenge brought him a sandwich, and proceeded to tell me the following story that led him to the life he now lives. He was a young investment banker in the late 90s making serious money. He was married and had a sex addiction. He would spend thousands of dollars on high-dollar hookers to do all kinds of weird stuff to him. He eventually got himself a sugar baby and set her up with an apartment in the city. He had no interest in children, but his wife did, so he got a secret vasectomy, thinking that he was only going to be effing 2 people now. He liked the idea of no condoms or babies at either house. His plan was to stay at the apartment for a couple weeks to heal while his wife thought he was in San Francisco for business. Unfortunately for him, his urologist's office called his home line to check in after a couple of days. This is when his wife started to learn of all of his illicit behavior. The cheating, the spending, the stealing of her future family. Over the weeks he was gone, she uncovered his secrets to her, and she sat on it. He told me in the weeks and months after his vasectomy, he started wanting to go out, get drunk, experiment with drugs and group sex. He was amazed at how much he and her were in sync now. He loved their newfound lifestyle. He really loved a particular drug that I don't think I can say out loud, but you know what, I said meth earlier, so he really loved cocaine. So much that he had to evict his sugar baby from the 7 to 8K he was spending a month on blow. He couldn't handle the expense anymore along with his habit. Luckily, his wife was still ride or die with the swinging, snorting life that they had built, so he was gonna be okay. And she was going along with every fantasy, recruiting men and women to have sex with. She kept building up this fantasy of having a threesome with his boss's wife, whispering things in his ear when they were having sex, just really putting her at the forefront of his thoughts. Christmas party time rolls around and the whole staff is wasted. She keeps him about the forbidden... I can't say that. The boss's wife goes to the restroom and his wife follows her. After a few minutes, they come out and the boss's wife waves at him. As the wife approaches, she tells him that she's down to swap and that's why she waved. Next time she goes to the restroom, he should just follow her in. She kept him at her side and fluffed until she sent him gleefully trailing behind his superior's wife into the restroom. No, that is not at all what she was waving for. Wifey had said that he didn't think she had seen him all night and a wave would make him feel better. He exposed himself and said he couldn't wait to taste what her husband left in his wife. After the scream and slap, the party halted. The next day, he was fired and subsequently blackballed from his industry. His cocaine habit sucked what little finances he had left after the divorce. He couldn't keep a job after his life fell apart. He's now homeless and has given blowjobs for a warm place to sleep and a meal. No, not for this meal. TLDR, he cheated, she got him addicted to blow and made him try to F his boss's wife, resulting in a chain reaction, ultimately leaving him homeless. I don't know if this is true, but it made for a good story during lunch and he seemed pretty sharp aside from the obvious drug addictions. I slid him a 20 for the sheer entertainment value. Hope I catch him for lunch again sometimes. Talk to a homeless person when you've got a few minutes and it feels safe. They have some great stories. Pro tip, bring a hasted sandwich. I'm sure there are typos, but I don't care. I'm off to work for 10 days and I have a crap load of pot to smoke. Edit. Karma got me the angry lady at lunch. I walked in on my Nana having sex in a hot tub last night, thinking that the sounds were someone in trouble. Little bit of a story break here from Ryan to you guys. Just to say sorry, I had no idea that today's episode was gonna be drugs, drugs, and more drugs. It's kinda weird. Let's get back into it. And with that, my friends, we've reached the end of today's video. If you liked it, make sure to leave an actual like on the video and check out some of our other stuff and maybe even subscribe. As always, my name's Ryan, the official host here at Reddit Voice, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.